Hi, this is Mary Baca with Remotely Unique, coming to you from our podcast studio in Albuquerque, New Mexico. On a very important day, actually, we are going to be doing a show that commemorates the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And such an important day for all of us to acknowledge. We're in the studio today on September 10th, but this will be aired, instead of airing it Monday, which we typically would do, we're going to air it on September 11th. And in putting together the show, it became really apparent to me that some people don't remember 9/11 because they weren't born or they were very young or things like that. So I think it's so important for us to keep it alive in terms of educating people, educating our youth, and really sharing, not only the devastation, but the resiliency involved. The resiliency, one of the most tangible evidences of that is the memorial that's up in New York, that they put up in New York to commemorate and acknowledge everything that went on. I haven't seen that memorial myself other than on pictures. I would love to. Maybe someday I can make it out there, but it's such a powerful image, and I know that a lot of people have made it out there and just describe the intense energy that is there when they go and see it. Some of that energy is somber and sad for obvious reasons, but some of that energy is of resilience and strength and power and the ability that we have as a nation to overcome things together. That's one of the things with 9/11 that was positive, is people really, developed a cohesiveness that helped all of us make it through together. The hard part is at some point that really dissipated. And, unfortunately, I think that happens a lot with us as a human race, is we band together in times of adversity, and then at some point we forget that and life goes back to normal and we almost forget how to be kind to each other. So that's the downside of that. But I know for myself, when I think about 9/11, and I think a lot of people are like this, those of us that do remember, is really remembering that moment or those moments and remember what that was like. And I was an instructor at a local community college at the time. It's called Central New Mexico Community College now, but it used to be called Technical Vocational Institute at the time, TVI. And I was teaching a class, a criminology class at the time actually before I went to class is when everything hit, literally. And I still had to go to class. The day had to go on. News hadn't spread yet. And so, life was still moving forward as we knew it at that time. And so I was just remember being in shock and disbelief at what I was seeing and hearing on the news and, on every channel on the TV, and just devastated, so emotionally blown away. I remember just being really impacted. I don't have the best of memories, but I remember that. That's how much of an impact it made. And then when I went to school and dealt with the students, trying to help these young people, in their early 20s or late teens who were in my class, trying to help them digest what had happened, and especially because at that point there wasn't that much information out other than the event itself. There were all the questions, who, what, when, where, and why had not even begun to be answered when I went to talk to my class. So just really helping them deal with the fallout, the shock, fear, disbelief. There was a lot of fear at that time from all of us that it was going to happen again, and lots of hypervigilance that is a byproduct of PTSD and acute stress anyways. And just really, sometimes getting stuck in that mode. So I think one of the things I want to say is, one of the very first things, right, is to thank all the men and women that served in the armed forces, all the military, the first responder personnel, all the counselors and social workers. A friend of mine, Jerry Lynn Matthews, she was a social worker at the time in New York City and helped pick up the pieces with dealing with first responders and their families. And you know, and I know she's being affected during this time. You know, it's something you just don't forget, right? So counselors, social workers, healthcare workers, all these people, not to mention all the employees that were in the buildings, all the people that were at the Pentagon, you know, so many people, over 3,000 people, right, totally affected. Well, over 3,000 people were killed. And then, you know, those that had emotional casualties as a response to all of this. There's all of that. So that's a devastating loss in life. And then when you expand it to understand that a lot of those people are still wreathing from the emotional devastation that happened. So please be mindful of that, you know, for all the people that were involved, and even if they weren't directly involved, a lot of people over this weekend and throughout even next week and this last week, so before, during, and after, are having a variety of mental, physical, and emotional responses to all of that. Please be mindful and be kind and compassionate during this time. Again, some people don't have a memory of what took place. They were too old or too young. I'd like to really focus last week and over the weekend and next week about the resiliency. I mean, obviously, we are such a strong people, a strong nation when we pull together and we establish that cohesiveness. We're capable of so much if we do that together. But at the time with 9/11, you know, there was a mixture of emotions. There was shock, there was sadness, fear, like I said. For those of you that don't know about acute stress and post-traumatic stress, they're very similar. The difference is that PTSD lasts beyond a month. And so I know I've talked to people, first responders and people who are directly impacted, that are having flashbacks. And, you know, flashbacks take place not only mentally and visually, but also body memories. And also survivor guilt is a real thing. Smells. You know, there's a lot of people that smelled the burning building, burning flesh. I mean, those are, I say that because, yeah, is that graphic? But those are the things that people are really living with, having, you know, to remember and remember what happened. But so with acute stress disorder and PTSD, you have flashbacks, lots of mixed emotions and mood fluctuations like anger, confusion, even being foggy. I don't know if you all know, but trauma impacts the brain. In fact, PTSD is a brain injury. So it oftentimes causes lack of mental clarity and just confusion and feeling kind of foggy and having difficulty concentrating. So if during this time you are having those symptoms, it could very well be that it's because of what happened with 9/11. So remember that. You may not have necessarily the visual recall and memory, but you may be experiencing those other things that I just mentioned. Another really common byproduct of acute stress or post-traumatic stress is being numb. So you might talk to people that seem like they don't have any emotional reaction to what took place, and you might think, wow, I guess they're just not impacted. Please don't draw that conclusion. Many people, in the eyes of trauma or severe stress or post-traumatic stress, numb out. And so they don't feel anything emotionally for a while. Some people don't have any emotional feelings for years, who have been through trauma or really significantly stressful and intense emotional situations. So, you know, be careful not to make that judgment, because it could be just how their psyche is dealing with the devastation. Other symptoms are extreme sadness that might seem disconnected. So again, in this time frame, it's not just now with the literal anniversary that people will experience these things. There are people that have started to experience these things like a month ago and will continue to experience these things a month from today or longer. And they may not be able to make the connection to what it's about, but it could very well be in response, their psychological response to 9/11 events. Anxiety, of course, which is not only a part of PTSD. I mean, PTSD is an anxiety disorder. Some people know that, some people don't. But either way, anxiety is a common mental condition that goes along with 9/11, and just watching it, that's one of the things that was difficult during that time, is just the replay of all of that over and over and over by the news and social media and different people. It's catch-22, because is it important to stay alert? Absolutely. Is it important for us to be educated about that devastation? Absolutely. But for a lot of people, including the people that were directly impacted, that's a lot of repeated exposure to that traumatic event. And so it doesn't always do something that's good. It can be just conjure up all those feelings all over again for people. And so over the weekend and next week, and it already started this last week, you're going to see a lot on the news, and especially with all those military servicemen and women who just were murdered in Afghanistan. We're still kind of reeling emotionally about that. There's been so many events, and I was so happy to see this. There's been so many events where they're acknowledging, and understandably so, acknowledging those men and women that lost their lives. And so that's really close in proximity, like in terms of when that occurred and 9/11. And so there's going to be that carryover. A lot of people, their grief is going to be expanded because of that just happening. And then here's 9/11, where we lost so many military personnel, first responders, healthcare workers, and then just, members of our country. So it'll be, probably all of this will be really even heightened because of the Afghanistan situation that just took place. Hypervigilance is a really big thing, and I think a lot of people are hypervigilant and don't even realize they're hypervigilant, because it can be anywhere from very subtle to super pronounced. So, where there's almost like paranoia to it. And so be aware of that for yourselves and other people. If there just seems to be more of like an alertness, but almost like an overreaction to situations or things, places, people, events, during this time, that hypervigilance is part of trauma. And that event, 9/11, was traumatic for all of us existing in that space and time that were developmentally mature enough to comprehend on any level what was taking place. It was traumatic for all of us. I don't think anybody's exempt from that. The other piece that is common to acute stress and PTSD is survivor guilt. So there are people that made it, that lived through that horrific event, and that feel like, why me? Why did I make it? And so who went down the elevator shaft, when it collapsed, didn't make it, and we were riding the elevator together, for example. That hasn't been said to me, but I'm just giving you a concrete example. It's probably somebody's story, though, right? Because that did happen, from my understanding, that the elevators collapsed. So be aware of that. There's a study that I was looking at, and they cited that 9 out of 10 Americans, so 92% of their sample, reported feeling sad when they watched TV that covered the terrorist attacks. And then same study that, let's see, that even 3 weeks after 9/11, that the psychological stress, people were under 87% of that sample said they felt angry about the attacks. And that's the way grief and trauma works, is there's so many mixed emotions, and it's kind of like a roller coaster. You don't really know when to predict where you're going to be at in that stage, and those stages are different for everyone. It's not like you can even predict and say, oh, well, I'm going to be totally mad this week, and next week I'm going to be totally sad. You know, it could be even moment by moment or hour by hour where you experience those mood fluctuations. From this sample, this study, most Americans said they were very or somewhat worried about another attack. So very concerned were 28% of Americans, and 45% said they were worried about another attack to some degree. When asked a year later to describe how their lives had changed, about half the adults said they felt more afraid, more careful, and more distrustful, or more vulnerable as a result of the attack. So for anybody that remembers those events, it's not something we've ever forgotten, and that's why the title of today's show is We Never Forget. We never forget the event, and we never forget all the lives that were lost, all the emotional repercussion of those events, and the people that suffered and are still suffering from it. We can't forget. We shouldn't forget. Even after, I think that the magnitude of what happened that day really left all of us wondering and educated to some degree about terrorism in general. I think a lot of people, myself included, were very naive before that, again, because of the magnitude of, of the whole thing. I mean, there was the Oklahoma City bombing with Timothy McVeigh, and that certainly, is a big event either, but not as catastrophic as this one. So it really caught our attention, and it caught our attention in a way that really we should have our awarenesses and, our eyes open and educate ourselves on things like the 9/11. In the cities that were directly targeted, so like New York and Washington, a year after 9/11, about 6 in 10 adults in New York, so 61% of the sample size of this study, and 63% in Washington, said the attacks had changed their lives at least a little, compared with 49% where people nationwide said it had changed their lives at least a little. So, and that makes sense, right? That people that are in those demographics, Washington and New York, that they'd be mostly the ones that would be impacted. I mean, just even by the health hazards, right? From the conditions of what was left behind, and then emotionally, because if we think we saw so much on the news, I'm sure they were inundated with news coverage because they lived specifically in the area. They knew people that had, gotten killed or were directly impacted. It was their direct community, so the impact was more huge in those areas. 15 years after 9/11, so in 2016, 76% of adults in the United States named the September 11 attacks as one of the 10 historical events of their lifetime. And so again, you just see reflected in the numbers how much of an importance these events had with people. And the other thing that happened, which I think is beautiful, is people put aside their party affiliations. Like, there was not division between Republicans and Democrats when it came to, dealing with 9/11. People just really pulled together. I wish that could happen now, right? Because we're very divided these days. But yeah, so that's another beautiful thing that happened. Another sign of resiliency, actually, that happened at those times is people just really pulled together, and it didn't even matter what political party they were from. The other thing that happened, which I think is beautiful, is people really turned to their religious and spiritual faiths during that time too, in large numbers. So 78% said that they found themselves praying more often, and that that there was a very strong religious influence in their life that increased more than double, during that time. And so I think that that is something too that was a really positive thing that happened. One of the things, though, too, on the not so good things is just the public, having a hard time trusting in the government and having confidence in the government, which tended to decline during the 2000s. And I know that there's since has been some funding, which John Field has really helped out with that a lot, going to Congress and getting funding, because there wasn't any funding that was happening for first responders or people whose health was impacted, from what happened during 9/11, from the dust and the toxins and all of that. And so many first responders have actually died from the health and physical repercussions of all of that, and which is a devastation on a different level, right? That the government really let them down until there was just some movement and events and advocacy for first responders to really get some help for them, so that they could be taken care of, with their health issues that they had that were a result of the attack. So that's always, it's incredible sometimes, when you see the government not really support people, but it is what it is. But, there was able to get some funding secured to assist with that. So I think, over the weekend, I was going to say try hard to not just live life, like none of it matters or none of it happened. But, we're in the midst of a pandemic still, so life is not really normal anyways, right? But this weekend, try to really be mindful and out of respect, and also just out of awareness and education of the reverberation of the trauma and the traumatic effect that this has had on all of us, really, that remember. And educate your children. Educate anybody who doesn't know about 9/11 and, the significance of it, and what's important about that event for us all to be aware of and know. And again, also to be compassionate with the military servicemen and women that will be impacted by this anniversary, and first responders and healthcare workers, and then also just regular people who will be impacted by this because maybe they lost loved ones during that time due to the attack itself. So just be really just kind to each other this weekend. I know I always end this show with be good to yourself and to each other. And this time, I can't think of another time when I would mean it even more from the depth of my core. You can find this segment and any others on our website, remotely-unique.com. It will be posted tomorrow morning, September 11th, or tomorrow mid-morning, on our YouTube channel, which is Remotely Unique. And I'll post it on Facebook. I'd like to thank my producer, Mike Suarez, who's here for every show. He'll be doing actually a show in the next couple of weeks because he's a balloon pilot. And so I'm going to interview him. He's going to reluctantly be on the show. But I'm going to interview him about just all of that, like what that experience is like and what is all involved, because I myself don't know. I've learned more than I did know, by talking to him. But I think that that a lot of people will be interested in hearing the ins and outs of that whole process. And, when even myself, like when I hear about people crewing during that time, I'm like, what does that even mean? So we'll hear about all of that in a couple of weeks. Next show, Cynthia Sanchez is going to be hosting the show one time a month, and she's going to talk about dating in the COVID and pandemic time. So that'll be really interesting to see and hear. You also can catch this show on Spotify, iTunes, and Amazon Music. So until next time, and I'm going to say this and look at you straight in the camera, be good to yourself and to each other. Bye for now.